Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Excuse me. Welcome to the October 23rd meeting of the commission. And I'm Leonard Austin, the chair of the commission. Ava Ayers is our vice chair, and the commission, I believe, is all here. Can we hear a report from our executive director?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The meeting is being held today pursuant to and in accordance with the provisions of the state's open meetings law and executive law, section 94. The conference room we're using in Albany at the commission's offices at 540 Broadway, and the meeting room at the New York State Conference Center at 25 Beaver Street in Manhattan are both open and accessible to the public. During public session is also being live streamed, and the link can be found on our website at ethics.ny.gov. I note that both the chair and Commissioner Caraballo are participating in the meeting remotely pursuant to Public Officers Law Section 103-A and the Commission's rules and resolutions for remote participation on account of extraordinary circumstances. And we do have between the Albany and Manhattan offices a quorum for today's meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Next on our agenda is the approval of the minutes. Are there any corrections, modifications, amendments to the minutes from our open session last month, excuse me?
Staff did receive one correction on page 28 of the minutes. The word coterminous is misspelled. It should be correctly spelled COTERMINOUS. And that's on page 28.
Other than that amendment, are there any other proposed amendments? I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes from our prior meeting, September 18th.
So moved.
Commissioner James, and second?
Commissioner Cardoza. I'll second it.
Okay, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? Okay, it's unanimous. Thank you. Next, although you have an agenda, we've made some changes, and my report is next. I just wanted to take a few moments to thank you all for your confidence. I've had the opportunity to speak with you all individually since our last meeting, and the comments you've made have been very helpful. The committees that we were able to establish pursuant to our new rule, I think, are well-personed and should be very much able to accomplish much for us. So I appreciate that very much. A reminder that my door remains open, and anything that you want to discuss, please feel free to contact me. So as one door closes, we have another that's opening, and we now are going forward in some unusual and difficult times. We do have a strong, positive, reliable staff who help us, and led by our executive director, I believe that we can and will accomplish much in the coming year. So I thank you and them for all of their help. Now, with regard to the purpose of the chair's report, it's to also introduce any committee reports that there may be from the ensuing month. Now, I understand that not every committee will have met between every commission meeting, but if there are reports to be made, this would be the time to do it. So we have our three standing committees that we will be discussing later, but I know our legislative committee has a report to make, and I'll give Commissioner Cardoza, the chair of that committee, the opportunity to speak in just a moment. Otherwise, I want to report on behalf of the ad hoc budget committee. The Department of or Division of Budget was very late, it seemed, to give us notice when they wanted our budget. And so I appointed, pursuant to our rules, an ad hoc budget committee to review and get questions. And then we did put it out to everybody with regard to getting your input as well. Commissioners Ayers and Karas were very helpful in reviewing the budget, and we were able to make some suggestions and get an understanding that I'm sure will be discussed as we go forward. In any event, I thank them, and since the work of the ad hoc committee started and has finished, there'll be no more ad hoc committee on the budget unless and until we need something further. That's also consistent with our new rules. As I've mentioned the new rules a couple of times. A big thank you to Justice Ayers for her efforts in getting those new rules passed. She brought consensus and a very positive tone to our efforts in that regard, and thank you. Commissioner Carabello, let me finish my report and then I'll take you.
No, I just want to say, there's like a sissing noise in the background. So if I could just, maybe people can mute their whatever until they're speaking. It's like a consistent. I apologize.
No problem. All right. So I think the project of having that new committee is the new approach to committees is very positive, and it's already seemed to be working. So thank you all. If there are no other questions, then I would ask Commissioner Cardozo to report on behalf of the Legislative Committee.
Thank you. I'm speaking on behalf of the Legislative Committee, which is composed of Commissioner James, Commissioner Karas, and Commissioner Carabello. And we did meet and discuss this, which is tab E, and we agreed, and I think it's important to recognize that we're talking about both our proposed tentative legislative agenda on the one hand, and then other deferred items that we have discussed in the past. And the legislative agenda we have labeled as tentative because we want to have a discussion. I don't know if I have time now, but if you have any comments, we welcome them. And then we will we may send out a supplement, and we'll certainly hear comments about that at the public meeting. And we then won't finalize that agenda formally until we've had an opportunity to consider the comments at the public hearing, and then we would formally vote on them. So calling this the tentative legislative agenda, it's very similar to last year. I do want to point out one change with respect to that. That is in item 9 of the proposed tentative legislative agenda. We had indicated on page 4 that we had not reached a consensus about that. But following further discussion with the people who didn't agree initially, and with a great deal of help from the staff, we have now reached a consensus that the provision with respect to item 8, we will propose this in our tentative legislative agenda. With respect to the deferred agenda, we've indicated in a few places that we want to study it more, in places where we think it's not endorsing it. So that's where we are at the moment, and we can all study it. The committee welcomes any additional comments, and then we can discuss it further at the November meeting, which will be it's before or after the public meeting, and then would formally adopt it. So that's my report.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
Just a quick one.
Please, Commissioner Edwards.
Would you go into more detail with regard to what the committee was having difficulty coming to consensus on item number 8? The
question was whether or not we should be more explicit with respect to how this should be phrased, and spell things out a little bit more than what it would. And we didn't have total agreement on that, but as a practical matter, we're talking about what we're going to support, you know, the legislative agenda. And obviously, as we all know, if you're putting something before the Assembly and Senate, there's going to be lots, assuming they're interested at all in pursuing this, we're going to have lots of discussions. I think that's the place, rather than airing minor potential differences now, which might come back to haunt us down the road. We felt that this was the approach, and welcome if any other members of the committee want to add to that explanation.
I would remind everybody that this is, in effect, a draft or talking points for our annual meeting on the 13th of November. It is not final by any means. Our guests at the public meeting last year submitted, I believe, something close to 70 suggestions that our staff culled through, the committee culled through, and we ended up with our final recommendation. So nothing here is final until we vote on it as our legislative agenda after the November 13th meeting and after consideration of anything else that is submitted as suggestions to us. But we have a very good ground game now in terms of what we're working with, and the committee's really done remarkably well. Thank you. That being the case, if there's nothing else, we'll move forward with the
Mr. Chair.
survey.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Commissioner Vice
Sorry,
Chair. Ayers.
Thanks. I just had two other questions. One, I was just curious whether there were whether there's differences between the tentative legislative agenda for this year. Like, are there things here that weren't there last year? Or are there things that were there last year that are taken off? And number two, I was just wondering if somebody could share how folks are thinking about what makes it onto the tentative legislative agenda versus what gets deferred. And specifically, my question is, are there things where we think it's a good idea, but we don't think it's worth pushing, so it doesn't make it onto our legislative agenda? Or is the legislative agenda a list of everything that we think we support?
No, well, I think it varies. I think what we have on the deferred legislative agenda is primarily a culmination of the things we heard last year that we haven't adopted in the legislative agenda. And some of them, for example, item 1, we think we can handle by a proposed advisory opinion, and we don't need legislation. Number 2 relates again to the sexual discrimination issue, and we think, as proposed, that we wanted to, in effect, say that we have total jurisdiction over all sexual discrimination matters in the state against public officials. Some of them are mandating filings by, for example, potential legislative candidates. And we thought that's a little premature and work that would have to be done in the budget issues. Some of the issues are suggestions based upon what other states have done, and the staff feels that they're not yet ready to either endorse it or not because they haven't had a chance to look at what other states have done. So there's a combination of reasons. Plus, some of them, some of the ones that we did endorse had gotten some legislative support as reflected by the bills that were introduced, and some, despite some advocacy, had got no support. So it's a combination of determinations that we made. And this is an 8-item or 9-item legislative agenda. It's one more than and again, it is tentative, as Len just said. One of the items that I think we all feel strongly about, we haven't discussed, is the amendments to the open meetings law, which we proposed last year and we're going to continue to pursue this year. So it's a combination of reasoning and discussing it with the staff that led to this conclusion.
Thanks.
Anybody else have any questions
And I
or
would add,
comments?
if I may, and there were a couple of proposals from last year's past session's legislative agenda that we were able to address through amendments to the regulations on the lobbying side. There are a number of things that the commission approved since then that have addressed some of the issues. There's still more to be done. So the residual pieces are, at least from staff's perspective, worthy of advancing again.
I had one question. We've got the preliminary findings from the survey that was conducted as part of the regular and statutory review that we're doing. How do you envision those findings factoring into this analysis?
Okay, first.
I'm happy to respond if that's as Commissioner Cardozo said, we do want to have legislative proposals considered at the upcoming public hearing. Although they're not strictly speaking part of the 1D process for the comprehensive review that we're doing, we expect the same, and we're going to have a presentation in a couple minutes by the consultants who conducted the survey for us. We expect that to be integrated into the process. But we don't want to, in terms of established legislative proposals, we want to keep moving on those, even as the larger comparative process under Section 1D, Section 94, subsection 1D, Section 94 proceeds, if that's the question. So we're moving on a couple of fronts. And I don't, at least from staff's perspective, I don't think the comprehensive review process should be taken as trumping the other obligation of the commission, and it's inherent in the public hearing process to continue to consider proposals for legislative change.
So they could
Any
be
other
on
questions?
future legislative agenda. Go ahead.
We're moving on multiple fronts, and we have multiple commands in the statute that
Sure.
we're complying with. One is annually to consider legislative amendments. The other is to do a comprehensive review
Right.
of all the statutes and regulations and advisory opinions, both for efficacy and for consistency, internal consistency.
Are there any other questions or comments? Thank you, Commissioner Cardozo. We next move to the survey that Sandy just alluded to with regard to our efforts in that regard. That's is it going to be Sandy or Commissioner Edwards who's going to be presenting that?
It will, yeah, I'll do it along with Emily DeSantis, the Director of Communications and Public Affairs. As I was just discussing with Commissioner Groenewegen, there are multiple legs, phases to the comprehensive review process. The commission has determined that we will be proceeding initially with a survey of both the lobbying and the ethics communities. And all commissioners participated in the framing of the questions. We did, as suggested by the commission, retain an outside firm, consultants, experts in the survey process, both to work with us in framing the questions and in putting the survey out, and also in ensuring the respondents that they would have anonymity. So staff is not privy to the identities of those who respond. We're only seeing the statistics that have come in and the analysis of it. The other leg in the process, the initial process, was is the review of the advisory opinions Director of Ethics, Michael Sant, has conducted a masterclass for most commissioners who are able to participate in it. We'll have another session for those who are unavailable. So we're working on that part of the process to understand the scheme of things as established in the interpretive advisory opinion. But the other leg in this initial phase is the survey. We retained Evolve Market Research, went through a procurement process. We concluded that they have the right qualifications and the ability to perform the survey. They've done that. Everyone has now seen, and I know it's a lot of facts and figures and whatnot, and it really will benefit from explication. Eric Lampier and Jared Tedisco, the principals of Evolve, are going to do a presentation now for the commission. I asked you to let them go through the presentation. I'll leave it to Eric and Jared, whether they want to take questions as they work through it, or if they prefer to go through the entire presentation. There are two parts to it, obviously. One is the ethics component of the survey, and the second is the lobbying component of the survey. Emily, do you want to add anything to that before we go?
Nope. Actually, I just will add, New York City, we're getting the shifting sound from you whenever somebody moves or talks. I don't know if you want to just mute for the presentation, and then when it's time for questions at the end, we can unmute you, but we're getting a lot of feedback from you. Thank you.
But Eric, Jared,
Yep, Sandy, thank you. Thank you for that. And we'll jump in and I will share the presentation here with all of you. So to the commission, thank you for having us today. As Sandy mentioned, I am Eric Lanthier here on behalf of Evolve Market Research. Jared Tedisco, my partner, was pulled into something else this morning, is not able to make it, but I will walk through this entire thing with you. As I am by myself, I will say we'll hold questions until the end. It'll be easier as we go through this. So we'll walk through how we conducted the survey, the responses that we got. We'll go through each of the survey results from the ethics and the lobbying side and kind of summarize that for you together. So as Sandy alluded to, a survey was developed by Colig. We took that survey, looked through it, revised it, made it efficient for an online survey distribution. We conducted a survey online, sent this through email addresses that were available and provided to us by Colig, distributed to over 500 ethics contacts and over 13,000 lobbying contacts. There were nearly 200 contacts that appeared in both lists and received an invitation to complete each survey. Survey was administered between August and September of this year. More than 30 questions in each survey, although a majority had skip logic. Essentially, if you were more dissatisfied, if you had more struggles, you received more questions as you went through that. About half of the total questions asked were open-ended. The majority of those had skip logic as well. The surveys themselves are designed to collect awareness, comprehension, challenges, and potential changes to the ethics, lobbying, laws, and regulations as they currently stand. To go through ethics first, there were 37 contacts that had emails bounced upon distribution. That being said, we received completed responses that were full and deemed valid for 168 respondents. That represents a response rate of 32%, which for this type of survey distribution is very good. Looking at a margin of error plus or minus 6% as we look through this. Looking at the demographic background of our population, we did see that the response rate of ethics officers in particular was very high and a little overrepresented amongst our sample. We saw a lower response rate among the Bar Association and district attorneys. This allowed us to provide a weighted response to allow for a more correct assumption as to what the results are going to look like. So in this case, where we're overweighted in ethics officers, we applied less weight to the ethics officers and more weight to those underrepresented, like the Bar Association and district attorneys. I will show both the complete responses as well as the weighted responses throughout the ethics portion. Looking at some of the results as we look at awareness, first, we see 95% of respondents are aware of materials that are available on the website. We see that that weighted response is 81%. This is an indication that ethics officers are much more aware of the materials available on the website than every other respondent to us. Indication that awareness is closer to 80% than it is likely to the 95%. 92% are familiar with ethics regulations and statutes that they enforce, weighted around 80% as well. And about 75% are familiar with COLIG and its predecessors' advisory opinions, weighted around 60%. We asked about a number of resources that COLIG provides, both communication and educational resources for the ethics laws and regulations. The majority of those resources were familiar to those respondents. Greater than half of respondents were familiar with just about all of the resources available. We did see a majority of those resources were found to be helpful of those familiar as well. With the website agency-led trainings, attorney of the day, PowerPoint presentations being particularly helpful and aware among respondents. Social media and the approval app assistance were lower as far as familiarity and helpfulness. As far as challenges, although there was a high level of awareness, there was still a decent amount of respondents who did indicate that they faced challenges in implementing the state's ethics laws and regulations. Specifically, 42% of all respondents faced some amount of challenge. Weighted, that equates to about 30%. Of those that faced challenges, which was 58 of those respondents, the largest challenge related to the lack of awareness among other employees within the agency, as well as clarity of the statutes and regulations and the materials provided, many indicating that they have other job responsibilities, creating difficulties there. On the positive side, what we do see is very few respondents indicating that their own lack of awareness is what's causing a challenge in implementing the state's laws and regulations, and that there's very few respondents as well that had a lack of support from their agency's leadership. Looking at communication challenges about responding to questions from the employees, we see even fewer respondents facing challenges related to communication, about 20% there, weighted at 15%. Of those respondents, again, 32 indicating facing challenges. Of those 32 respondents, we're looking at education materials being confusing, more than half of those, lack of opportunities to ask questions or receive guidance from COLIG as well. Being those highest rated items for those facing challenges. Looking at enforcement, 3 out of 4 respondents feel as though they can implement this ethics statutes and regulations at their agency. 2 out of 3 feel like they can enforce compliance and that the current statutes are adequate to compliance with ethics requirements. We do see that as it relates to clarity, 60% feeling that the regulations are clear, this being 2 out of 5 indicating that the regulations are not clear, to look at that in another way. So a good portion of respondents, again, indicating clarity, and we will see that as a theme throughout this. Ethics statutes need to be strengthened, 1 out of 4 indicating that's true, and 1 out of 5 indicating that current statutes need greater penalties to deter wrongdoing. About 30% feel that there are too few advisory opinions directly related to them and their own agency. Too many COLIG and predecessor opinions to determine how to ensure compliance is about 1 out of 4. 1 out of 5 indicating conflicting COLIG and predecessor advisory opinions, which make it difficult to determine and ensure compliance. One of the open-ended questions that we went through was asking unprompted which specific topics would be helpful to be addressed in future advisory opinions or regulations. These were not poked or prodded out of them. So as we look at these kind of in order, we're saying those at the top, the conflicts of interest and trust was responded by 8 unique individuals. This would indicate that that could be the priority that would benefit the largest population of ethics officers and others related to the ethics side. Post-employment restrictions, SUNY and CUNY examples, and some of these others were responded by 3 or more respondents as well. Looking at ethics officers in particular, we see high levels of awareness. 100% were aware of the materials on the website, 92% familiar with COLIG and the predecessor's advisory opinions, 96% familiar with COLIG's ethics regulations and ethics statutes they enforce. Again, high level of ability to implement at nearly 80%, and 70% feel they can enforce compliance with ethics statutes and regulations. That being the case, although there was a high level of awareness among ethics officers, we still see greater than half facing challenges in implementing the state's ethics laws and regulations, and 30% facing challenges in communication. As we saw on the previous slide, ethics officers are the majority of the respondents there. So from an ethics officer's standpoint, the challenges in implementing the state's ethics laws and regulations relate to the difficulties among other employees and their own awareness of the ethics laws that they are operating under, as well as some clarity of ethics laws and regulations. Looking at those in leadership, we found that those that were in leadership positions were more likely to be able to implement the laws and regulations, more likely to be able to enforce compliance, more likely to believe that the ethics statutes and regulations were clear, and less likely to feel that there were changes needed. An indication to us that there is some level of authority that leadership members have, which allows them to more easily implement and enforce compliance, whereas those who may not be in leadership positions may struggle a little bit more in being able to implement and enforce those laws and regulations at their agencies. Similarly, as we look at the organizational size, organizations that had more agents within their organization faced a greater challenge. Theoretically, this makes sense. The more employees that an organization has, the greater the probability that some employees are not going to understand the ethics laws and regulations. So the greater size the organization, the greater likelihood that there was challenges in implementation. We also did see that the larger the organization, the larger the awareness of the ethics laws and regulations, as well as the advisory opinions existed. Jumping over to lobbying, we saw that 1,200 emails bounced upon distribution. We did.
1 minute.
I'm just wondering, would it make sense to see if anybody has any questions on the ethics side before we proceed to lobbying?
I would go through the whole thing and then come back.
It would be helpful to do that now, though, because I'm going to lose it. I'm going to forget the questions.
All right.
By all means, we can jump into ethics now. I think that's fine. Yeah.
Okay.
Were there ethics questions? Any ethics questions?
I have a quick question. When you looked at the ethics survey results, future advisory topics, and you mentioned that there were the number of respondents were 8, 4, 3, etc. Is that out of 500 people?
It's out of 150 respondents that we were looking at, not the total number that were surveyed. So 150 respondents, we're looking at 8. It is a small number that's there, but seeing as it was unprompted, that we weren't leading them to conflicts of interest and trust, even though it is 8 and it is small, it still represented a trend for us as far as something that was coming up and being on top of mind for people as we were asking that question.
Do you see, thank you for that answer. Looking at the findings from your survey, can you point to any specific policy issues we should be mindful of as we move forward?
Yeah, so that was something we were trying to keep our eye on to see if there was anything specific that was coming through, especially in the comments as they went through them. Generally speaking, comments did not specify any individual areas to direct you as to one direct law, regulation, or anything like that. It was more generally around the clarity of all of those things. So it's one of those things I wish we had direct examples, but direct examples were not provided across respondents. More general responses there. Yeah.
Well, I guess I was concerned with some of the large number, the large percentage of people who didn't quite, who felt that, I'm trying to look for the particular overhead, but there's a large percentage of respondents who felt the regulations were unclear. Am I right?
Yeah, we're looking at 40% of respondents feeling that regulations are unclear. Yes. Yes.
So I would think that, for example, that might be something the education and training division could use these findings as an attempt to fine tune or take a look at the way in which we're communicating that information, for example. So that's what I'm asking for, those kinds of what's in the data that we can use as a basis to begin thinking about the policies we're putting forward.
Yeah, so you mentioned clarity, and clarity, as I summarize everything near the end of this, that stuck out to us as we looked at it, that across really both of these surveys, we're looking at clarity among the statutes, the laws, the regulations. That was the largest comment throughout the survey across any of these things. So whether that is related to training and training of those that may think that clarity needs more adjustment, such as those that are in non-leadership positions who felt that there was a need for clarity more often than those in leadership positions, whether that's training, whether that is one-on-one time or whatever that could be, or if that is just looking at the language and identifying areas that could be adjusted. One of the other examples that came through as it relates to clarity and definitions often was that individuals were looking for examples that represented their own industry. Right, that certainly providing examples for every single industry is time consuming on your side, but the ability to read the law regulation and then relate it back to whatever that meant for them, whether that was SUNY or CUNY that showed up here or any other industry, was there something that could be done to help clarify the regulations in a way that relates them back to my own area, as an instance.
Is this a draft? Is this a draft?
No,
This
this is final.
Okay. So I guess at some point, we probably would be helpful if staff came up with a list of policy issues that we might want to pursue based on the findings of this report.
Yeah, well, I think what Eric's talking about too is not necessarily a changing in the policy, but relooking at how we're communicating it, right?
Yeah.
So like we've done ethics at a glance for several areas with
So-
ethics. So looking at expanding those because those are being helpful and used.
I don't disagree with that.
And for training, again, greater clarity and specific examples of our training. that
So
we
it's
can
policy and implementation of existing policies that we might be.
Yeah, implementation.
I
Yes,
understand
exactly.
And then I had a question about, you mentioned that the larger organizations with larger populations, I think in excess of 1,000, was it? That they found more difficulty in implementing the plan than the smaller agencies. Any thought on why that is?
And I have a question related to that, if I could.
Mhm.
Because I look at that slide about the organizational size, and there seems to me to be something incongruous here in that I can understand the issue of more employees could mean more challenges.
Right.
And yet, when you look at the slide about implementation challenges, 54% said lack of awareness in my agency about state ethics laws and regulations was the number one challenge. And yet, when we look at the chart again about organizational size and familiarity by organization size, the thing that is most problematic, lack of knowledge, and the bigger agencies is 100%. And so there seems to me something incongruous there. And that,
I don't know if that question, I think this question more applies. Like, what was the, do you remember what the?
So Emily, I'll jump in there.
Familiarity by organization size?
Yeah, so we asked about organization size separately as a demographic question, and then we tied the answers back based on the same questions that were being touched on related to challenges and implementation that was here. What I will say, and looking at that difference between the challenges that exist at 53% with those greater than 5,000 and the awareness at 100% of those is a difference between my own awareness as someone who's looking to implement and enforce these laws and regulations, where that is 100%, versus the awareness of other employees throughout the organization, which is causing a challenge in its own right of I have greater than 5,000 employees that I have to worry about. The awareness of greater than 5,000 employees, maybe you have 4,000 that are aware, but 1,000 being unaware creates a large challenge just because of the size that exists. So that greatest challenge is awareness among other
Can I just add to that, Eric? Eric,
Yeah.
let me just add to that. The other thing you have to think about too is organizations that have a lot of employees, one, it's harder to get them to know about it, but they're more likely to have a dedicated ethics officer where that's their only job. So they're going to be more familiar with the laws and regulations versus the smaller agencies where it's a lawyer part of their job, right? So they'll be likely at the smaller agencies, the ethics officer to know all the ins and the outs.
There's also a reciprocal effect because the more aware leadership is of the requirements of the law, the more sensitive they're going to be to departures by the workers in their group. It probably amplifies it to some extent, but without
that all
getting
makes
into
sense.
cost.
I just think maybe the juxtaposition of these two items together creates a confusion.
Yes,
that's not
yes.
there.
No,
So,
I see what you're saying. Yep.
thank you.
But I think it does validate the larger training initiative that we have to implement.
Right.
That there is a need for broader training.
Right.
It's not a question necessarily of the effectiveness of the training, it's pushing more of it out.
Agreed.
My last question, if I may ask, is around your slide titled Ethics Survey Results Changes Comments, where you have while a small number of respondents, you've indicated that it is helpful because it reflected a trend in your data. And so my question to you is, I was thinking, does it make any sense to you to go back to the response, where there are trends in responses, go back to the respondents through focus group to get an indication of what specifics they're referencing in their responses? And would that be of any value to us?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, the quantitative based with some qualitative survey like this that gets you the large responses is a means of determining where the focus groups are going to be helpful. And then once we identify what those issues are and where there is issues like this, where we're talking about clarity, if you get a number of people together, and I believe we did ask a question in this as to whether or not you wanted to be followed up with from colleagues. So we do have a list of employees who could be interested in a focus group type conversation, where there is certainly benefit in digging into those questions a little bit more, right? Because we just ask these more or less on a surface level, tell us more about clarity. That only gets you so far, where we can't really ask follow-up questions in an open-ended survey. So I absolutely agree that a focus group would help you get to the bottom of these a little bit more deeper to identify which direct laws and regulations or which sentence or whatever that might be needs to be adjusted. So yeah, I would argue for a focus group to help clarify and get a little more information on some of these things to really pinpoint where you need to go. Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a question. I think this is very, very impressive. And I think the real challenge is what's next. And I think not only the comments that have been made, but the people who did respond, 50%, we have 50% responses, but it also means, at least from the ethics officers, we have far fewer percentage, and I suspect that the lobbying percentages may be small also. And so I think that part of the challenge is reaching people who we didn't hear from at all, which may be concentrated, as was said, in some of the smaller agencies. But that's, when you put all the smaller agencies together, that's a large number of employees. So I think we have to, seriously consider what our next steps are to implement this very helpful information.
So I would argue, and I think I have this at the end, that some of those next steps could be identifying those areas that have less familiarity, like the slide I'm showing now, those in smaller organizations. If you target them directly, right, as opposed to having some broad training, you're developing some training or workshop or whatever that is for small organizations. So we can identify here's where there is a gap in familiarity. So let's look at those individuals directly and see if we can develop something that targets those specific areas so that you can have a greater impact as opposed to having something that exists for everyone. But yeah, I think those next steps and what you're identifying, whether that is a focus group or whether that is identifying something that is going to target specific areas where you need to improve familiarity or improve clarity, I think that's your next steps. Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Yes. So, hi, this is Ava Ayers in Albany. Thank you so much for this. It's incredibly helpful. I just think I missed something when you were explaining on this slide called Ethics Survey Results - Enforcement, which I think may be slide number 12. That's the one thing. You mentioned something about when it says the current ethics statutes and regulations are clear, the bar shows 61%, but you said that's 2 out of 5.
Two out of 5 opposite. I flipped it. So 2 out of 5 feel that is unclear. Yeah. So 3 out of 5 feel it is clear. 2 out of 5 feel that it is unclear. Yes.
Thank you. That's what I missed.
Yeah.
So my other question just has to do with contextualizing this, and I think it's more relevant to the ethics side than the lobbying side, maybe. Just in your experience doing work like this, to what extent should we be thinking about status quo bias? And what I'm thinking is that when I look at the results that show the leadership thinks things are more clear than the non-leadership, and when this, to me, shockingly high percentage of people say they don't face challenges in doing this work, which is like not something I've ever heard anyone with a job say about their job. Like that just strikes me as a very strange result. And even without those two, I'm thinking about, in my experience working with people in different institutions, people tend to think that their institution is working basically okay. That's sort of a basic fact about human psychology, I think. And so as we interpret these, to what extent should we be thinking about that kind of sort of natural complacency, natural tendency to think the status quo is working okay? And to what extent do you see any of that in these numbers?
Yeah, so that last question is the hard one to answer, right? Because there is always going to be some level of response bias that exists in any survey that we're doing, but understanding exactly what that response bias is more or less impossible. I don't know what the real percentage of this is. And so as I look at clarity, as I look at challenges within my organization, there exists a true percentage. It's hard to know what that true percentage is. This is where the margin of error comes into place, whereas we're looking at ethics, this could be up or down 6% generally. A response bias could move that even a little bit more. But what we're really looking at here is comparing essentially these answers to themselves. We have 1 year's worth of data as we're looking at this. So the ethics statutes being clear, 61%. We look at that, we say, if it was asked in a vacuum, we say, it is what it is. I don't know if that's good. I don't know if that's bad. I don't know which direction that goes. But I look at this in comparison to the other questions asked within this table, and I say compare it to the implementation, their enforcement, that's a little bit lower. So clarity on this case is a little lower on those things. And then if you ask the survey again, another year, you see if that goes up, that goes down, how that changes. And that response bias as you look 1 year to the next should be fairly similar, right? So the true percentage may elude you, may be difficult to find. So you're just really looking at the responses as it exists here. You might be right. Everyone might face some challenge, but I say, it's not that hard, or I'm facing challenges in something else today. So in today's response, I don't feel like this is a challenge, or I forgot about it, or whatever that is. So the actual percentages might not be exact. They may not be the real percentage per se, but there's some level of margin of error that exists in all survey responses. And in the data that we have, what we can say what was given to us, right? So we know what was out there. There's some level of people that didn't respond to, and those may be even less engaged of those that didn't respond, just because they didn't respond to this. If they didn't respond to this, they may be less engaged in other things as well. So there's a lot of that bias that could exist within this data, but we take that as it is, and to really eliminate some of that bias, you ask this a couple of years in a row, and you see how things change, and if there's any adjustments that happen.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, so let's move on to lobbying.
Thank you. So in lobbying, as I said, 1,200 emails bounced. We received completed responses from just under 1,100 of those respondents. It's an 8% response rate, but given that 8% response rate, we have a margin of error below 3%. In any large survey, looking at 13,000 employees, really even looking at up to 1 million contacts, looking at a margin of error of 3% is really the goal. For us, as we look at this, we want to be below a 3% margin of error. With smaller populations like ethics, that's hard to accomplish, but we were below that on the lobbying side, which did tell us that we have a high level of trust in what the data is saying. We got 65 respondents from public sector employees, 260 from private sector, and 359 from non-private. We see that respondents varied across New York State, with a large portion represented in New York City and the capital region, and many respondents were represented across multiple regions throughout the state. Looking at awareness on the lobbying side, and we certainly have lobbying respondents who are responsible for enforcement and those who are looking at reporting. So it's a little bit different mix as we're talking about lobbying respondents. We see lower level of awareness, especially for the website, with 2/3 being aware of what is available on the website for lobbyists and lobbying clients. 86% familiar with colleagues' lobbying regulations. The communication resources available to them, there were fewer available to lobbying clients. We see that of those resources, less than half found that each of the resources were helpful outside of the help desk. A large percentage of respondents found that the help desk was helpful, was the most helpful resource, and we did have strong familiarity of the help desk. Although with its level of helpfulness, we could see the familiarity of the help desk improved. That would have an even greater benefit to the lobbying. In talking to Sandy, there's certainly a lot of things that come through the help desk on any given year, but improvement there certainly is going to improve the helpfulness for lobbying clients and lobbyists. Social media and the newsletter were rated as less familiar and less helpful. Looking at challenges, we see a similar percentage of lobbying respondents facing challenges, about 40% indicating they're facing challenges, understanding and complying with the state's lobbying laws and regulations. Of those, 339 facing challenges, the top percentage being lobbying regulations unclear, again, talking about clarity, education materials being confusing, or their own lack of awareness. A little bit of a difference on the lobbying side. We're seeing half of those facing challenges having a lack of their own awareness of the state's lobbying laws and regulations. Opposite side, penalties being not sufficient is negligible. 5%, very small percentage feeling penalties are not sufficient. And limited respondents feel that the investigation and enforcement process takes too long. Looking at compliance, a large percentage feel that they can comply with regulations, nearly 90%. Dropping below that, we're looking at regulations requiring significant disclosure at 70%, current regulations being adequate at 60%. Clarity, again, here we're looking at about half of respondents saying that the current regulations are clear. And the current regulations set forth establish a reasonable balance between transparency, 52%, and lobbying law needs to authorize new or increased penalties, much lower at 16%. We asked whether or not respondents felt that changes were needed to any of the lobbying laws and regulations. 32% felt that changes were needed, represented by 160 respondents. Those, as far as the lobbying laws and regulations themselves, they broke down really into three different tiers, I would say, looking at grassroots source of funding and coalitions being that top tier as far as those respondents feeling that changes were needed. Tier 2 really falling down into the client semi-annual reports, the lobbyist bi-monthly reports, reportable business relationships, and direct lobbying. And tier 3, even though we're talking about a third of individuals who feel like they need to be changed, much lower on the scale at definition, statement of registration, and procurement lobbying. Of those top 3, we do see a theme across all of those. Again, it goes right back to what we've been saying. Clarity, grassroots lobbying, definitions being not clear, being a large portion of that, open-ended response, language being too complicated, regulations too burdensome, or the regulation is too complicated from respondents there. Sources of funding, we're looking again, language should be made clearer. The regulation itself is confusing and or complicated, and it is time consuming to complete. And coalition almost exclusively boils down to the clarification of the definitions in the language itself. Looking by sector, we see the public sector employees who are more likely to be on the enforcement side of lobbying or less likely to face challenges, to feel that regulations are unclear. They're more likely to be aware of the materials. They are less likely to think changes should be made to the lobbying regulations or laws. They're more likely to feel that current regulations are adequate, more likely to feel current regulations are clear, more likely to feel that current regulations set forth requirements that establish a reasonable balance between transparency and undue burden, and more likely to feel the lobbying law needs to authorize new or increased penalties. So those truly on the reporting side, having greater challenge, having a greater misunderstanding of what's going on, and a little more difficulty for those that are in the private and nonprofit sectors. So to summarize both surveys, kind of as we look at this, there is a strong familiarity and ability to ensure compliance. Part of that could be the bias that we talked about, where I may not want to say that I'm unfamiliar with the regulations, especially if I am an ethics officer. I may not want to admit the fact that I'm unaware of those things. There's significant challenges, mainly related to awareness of other employees across the organization and clarity and language related to the definitions that exist. Any additional trainings, materials, and clarity around definitions is what could be most beneficial to constituents. Any support that can be provided for non-leaders that may feel as though they don't have the authority to enforce the laws and regulations, any support that can be provided there can have a large benefit. And any familiarity campaigns that could go out for small organizations in particular, especially around ethics, and those in private and nonprofit sectors could help with improve the familiarity of the laws and regulations that exist. So with that, we covered lobbying or ethics. Are there any questions on the lobbying side?
Yeah, I guess I have one. So in terms of the challenges, do you think it's fair to say that there are different challenges relating to clarity versus awareness? In other words, like I'm trying to interpret the different categories in this survey, and it seems like one category is like, do the things make sense when you read them? And the other is, do you know what's out there? Are you familiar with them? Have you spent the time that you need? Or all the things that change your awareness? In other words, one is speaking to a change that would be needed in the texts, and the other is the education and training around those texts.
That is correct. And in the slide that I'm showing, clarity ranks slightly higher than awareness, but I think on the lobbying side, both of those do rate as some of the top issues, whereas clarity is going to be, what does the definition say? And I don't understand what it means. And awareness
Right.
is, I'm just not taking the time to understand what the laws and regulation are. I just don't know that it exists. So it is those, how can you create a benefit that says, here's where it is, here's how it applies to you, here's how you need to report or enforce, et cetera, and getting that awareness out. So certainly those things are two different items as I would look at them.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions?
I have a question.
We will,
Commissioner Edwards?
I have a question.
Go ahead. Commissioner Evans.
Yeah, I just need I don't understand, the lobbying survey results awareness. Is 85% are familiar with COVIG's lobbying regulations. Can you explain the chart on the right? Am I to assume that, I just don't understand it, that's all, my own lack of knowledge. The central line is representing 50% of people thought it was helpful. And as the dots deviate to the left, to the right, they're
More helpful.
higher,
More
more
helpful.
helpful, to the left and to the left, less helpful?
Yes.
Is that what it is? So if that's indeed the case, the WebEx training is not helpful?
Not that it's not
Well-
helpful. It's just seen as helpful to about 45% of the respondents. And so it is helpful to some. It's certainly not helpful to everyone. You're basically splitting that close to half as far as those that find it helpful.
And keep in mind, that's not the required training, that's the additional training that the lobbying unit offers. And so looking at this, we're saying, okay, not as many people would take those trainings, right? As would take like the online training. So it might just be that they don't have a knowledge base to say, yes, that was helpful because they didn't do it.
And the awareness is relatively low. It's above 50%. But it's not way up at the top.
Correct.
So, one indication is we need to create greater awareness of the availability of those trainings. Because as Emily is saying, it's not the mandatory ethics training for lobbyists that we're talking about, clients. We're talking about the instructional help that the agency is pushing down.
So sorry, what's the difference between the online training course and the WebEx? training?
That's the required one that all
Online
8,000
training.
lobbyists, so like you see a really high number know about that one.
Because we
right?
made them.
But then Carol's shop does these supplemental trainings, like how do you do a registration? How do you do this? And Carol and I have already talked about it, like, oh, this is really helpful because now we know where we need to put out additional like one-pagers and do additional targeted trainings in certain areas of the regulations that people are having, difficulty with. So I think, if we did this again, we would see the WebEx trainings because we know we're going to offer more and promote them more would go up. Because I think people who do take them think they're useful, but if you don't take it, you're not going to think it's useful.
And I would also add, we do have a lot of guidance material on our website. I'm not sure, number one, anyone reads them, or maybe they don't know they're there. So another thing that we could do is maybe make some of those longer guidance documents into a page or two.
Right.
Yeah.
High level. And if you want the detail, go see the 15 to 20 to 30 page guidance document that exists on the website. So those are the things we could probably do that might be more helpful. But awareness might be key.
Right.
There's also the paradox that the lobbying unit is so good, the help desk is so good at providing guidance, that there's a heavy dependency upon, and I think in the lobbying community, that's why we're getting so many calls, and that's why it's getting such a favorable review. If you're puzzled by something, you don't have to learn it.
It's
You
easier
call
to
the help
Right.
desk.
It's easier to call than to find it on the website. And
Do it.
I feel the same way.
So just, does the survey screen so that only people who say they're familiar with an item can rate its helpfulness? Like, can you say, no, I'm not familiar with the WebEx trainings and no, they're not helpful? That seems like it wouldn't be a useful piece of data.
No.
Or that it is.
So the way this question is asked is that you're asked about helpfulness on a scale with the option to say, I am not familiar. So the helpful percentage here is only for those who essentially are familiar with it. You either rated it helpful or you said, I'm not familiar with it.
Okay, thanks.
Are there any other questions? Seeing none, I'll thank Eric very much for the presentation. I'm sure we'll have more questions later, and if you don't mind, we'll stay in touch and see how you can help further.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for the
So
time.
much.
Thanks, Eric.
Yes, thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
Extend our thanks
Great.
to Jared as well.
Eric and Jared have been wonderful to work with. I just want to mention, they've been really helpful and had great suggestions for us as we were developing the surveys and interpreting them.
All right, question.
Thank you. And I think, Chair, we were going to proceed to discussion of the November 13th, the upcoming,
Right, that's the
Public
next
hearing.
on the amended agenda. All right, we have a meeting on the 13th at the New York City Bar Association. Obviously, the legislative aspect will be a portion of it. I believe only one of us can't make it, so we're looking forward to meeting with the various interest groups and the public to get their input.
November
let me say,
13th.
the notice that's been issued so far is under tab F.
Right, so I can talk a little bit
Yes.
about, so we put the news release out on October 10th, about a month beforehand. And then we also sent, like a notice with a link to the news release, as we did with the Save the Date, to 48,000 people. So that was a very comprehensive list that all went out to. We will be doing a reminder next week with, we'll add in here that the tentative legislative agenda is now available for review and comment as well. We did mention legislative agenda in the original notice, but we'll emphasize it now as like, oh, you can also comment on this, because that's not the only thing we're taking comment on. There's other things that we're statutorily required to. And so we'll get that out about November 1st. We've been regularly putting it in our newsletters and on social media. But I will say there is less interest this year. So far, we have about 3 people signed up. So I think part of that might be reflective of people said what they needed to say and feel like they were heard, because of all the work we've been doing since the last public hearing, which has continued now into the survey. And, it's all kind of feeding into each other. So I don't want people to think, it's necessarily a bad thing. I think especially some of the interest groups know that we're in tune to what they've been saying and we were listening to it, and our actions kind of reflect that. So we'll continue to promote it, but at this point, that's where we are.
Will there be an agenda that will be put out for the meeting, Emily?
Yes, so the agenda will be that Chair Austin and Executive Director Berlin will give opening remarks. Then we'll have people come up and they'll be numbered, because we have one in Albany who's going to be speaking, one in New York City who's going to be speaking, and one online. So we'll let them know the order ahead of time. And as more come in, and we're thinking, well, because, there's fewer, we'll give them about 10 minutes each, as long as, that doesn't change. We'll let them know ahead of time that they have 10 minutes. And then, we'll go until it's done, or 3:30, whichever. Yes.
At the last hearing, there were some issues with regard to people feeling they didn't have enough time to speak.
So we've doubled the time.
So, okay, my question is thank you for that doubling, but still in terms of limitations, have we considered if there are few people and there's a need for extended time, that we give that we consider that flexibility? It just
I leave
seemed
it
to
to the
create-
commissioners. If you were to consider that, I would keep them to their 10 minutes at the beginning and let everybody else go. And then so you can have an additional 5 at the end, not keep giving them 10 and 10 and 10, or else we could be there talking to one person for 3 hours, which is not the intent. We want to hear from, as many
Okay,
people.
right. I was prefaced by saying we didn't have many responses the last time, and we have 3 this time. And I'm just saying that putting those kinds of I'm not saying we shouldn't have restrictions. We don't want to listen to one person for 4 hours. I get that. But it created animosity unnecessarily when we were cutting people off, when clearly there was time. So I'm questioning, can we try to avoid that this time by being flexible regarding being flexible, taking into consideration the existing atmosphere we're in and the time frame that we're in. If we've got a lot of people, then we can't do it. But if it's few, you want to engage conversation.
Yeah, like I said,
So
my
I-
suggestion
So
would
for
be.
example, I wouldn't say, okay, your 20 minutes is up, but at the end, if you want to come back, I don't think that that's helpful, for example.
But then you're not being fair to the other people who are told they only have 10 minutes and they've been sitting through the first 10 minutes of this person. And now you're giving them extra time. So now they're gonna have to sit through 30, 40 minutes of a person when they were told they were number two after the 10-minute person before them. So you want to keep it fair to all parties. And if that person really has a lot to say, like I said, I would invite them after everybody gets their 10 minutes and you could figure out how much time you want to allocate to that person.
I'm inclined to be
And
optimistic.
hopefully you'll be
I think
able
that we'll have a
to,
surge of interest in appearing at this event, so.
I just
and
think
hopefully
that
you'll be
I'm
able to
only saying,
rely on the discretion
I'm
of the chair to be able to keep it going and not be unfair to anybody. Commissioner Cardozo?
I also don't think that we want to create hostility to the public. I want to be on record for saying that. We don't want to be hostile. This is an open public hearing that where we want meaningful input and not to have it for the sake of meeting the requirements.
And I think
that
we
came off
did
that-
everything.
I think we came off that way the last public meeting we had. Unfairly.
When they-
but that's how
Understood,
we
but
came.
I think there needs to be a balance, and Chair Davy made a great effort to give everybody an opportunity to be heard without turning the session into an ad hominem. So I think I will exercise my discretion, and everybody will get a chance to be heard. Commissioner Cardozo?
Depending upon what is said, is there any opportunity, would you want to take an opportunity to ask questions or respond in any way? If someone says, well, I don't understand this, do we want to ask questions at the meeting or respond in any way at the meeting if there's a specific comment made on a particular proposal?
Well, obviously, we're not commenting on litigation, active litigation, or anything of the sort, active investigations. But if there is somebody who can respond without getting it into a dialogue of enormous proportions, then I think getting the question answered by the appropriate staff person would be appropriate.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, Commissioner James.
I share Commissioner Edwards' concern that we may be viewed as cutting off individuals who wish to make comments. Did we provide a date by which anyone who wants to speak has to let us know?
Yes, we have. It's November 6th.
Okay, so if that's the case, maybe we should determine the length of time that we will permit people to speak after we know how many speakers there are.
We could do that.
Yes, that was our intent, to finalize the length of time once we know.
I think that makes good sense as well.
Anybody else, comments?
Yeah, you had mentioned that the comments, if people ask questions, that we would defer to staff. So are you suggesting that commissioners, once again, should not participate in the conversation?
No,
As we
I'm
did
saying
last
that.
year.
Can I jump in here? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
In my view, the purpose of the public hearing is to take the comments and not to get into a dialogue with people at that point. If we want to ask follow-up questions, we have their contact information and we can do that. And if they have questions, we did follow up last time with clarifying information and did all of that. But to engage in a dialogue at a public hearing where the intent is for them just to talk to us, I don't think is the appropriate use of the public hearing. That's my opinion. Commissioners may feel differently, but I just wanted to.
We're not there to debate with them. We're there to do fact finding and hear what's on their minds. And I think.
I have a quick question.
Sure, 1 second, if I may. We devolved towards the end, as you'll recall, with individuals who have sued us or who were involved in various issues with the commission, and we try to give them their say without being rude. Sometimes that's difficult, but sometimes those who don't understand the ground rules need to be reminded. I would suggest that we be careful in our responses and listen to what they have to say and do appropriately. But if there's a specific question about some procedure or the like, and a staff person can respond immediately to it, that's one thing. But to get into a debate with an individual who may feel aggrieved by something or the like, that's not appropriate. And I think that would be dangerous to us, frankly. Commissioner Carabello.
Well, two things. I think the question was whether commissioners could respond. And you're saying it just should be a staff person. I'm just want to clarify.
I think it depends on the circumstance, but I would be circumspect.
And my second question is, my press release says that the public may comment until November 15th. Is that just a typo? Or?
In writing.
In writing.
We'll have comments in writing until November 15th.
Okay, mine says in person or via video conference. So I just wondered about that.
Well, in video conference or in person would be at the public hearing and then in writing by November 15th. But I can see why you're saying that's a little unclear. We can clarify that.
So we don't get it in advance of the meeting? We're not getting the comments in advance of the meeting?
No, we didn't. Last time, there's
Emily, in my
I would just-
comments, perhaps you can
Some,
include.
some did. send
Some
them
did.
in
Yeah,
advance.
you're right. Some did and some
It
didn't.
varies. It
I
varies.
was just thinking that we would, I thought we had agreed that we'd wait until we receive the comments in order, before determining the length of time. But we're
Oh,
not
no,
gonna get the
no,
comments
no.
until.
To sign up that they want to comment. So saying they want to come in and speak at the public hearing. That's what we're going to wait for. So if we have 3 people versus 50 people who
I
say they
see,
want.
but we're not asking for the comments in
No,
advance.
no.
Would that be helpful to see it in advance?
It poses a challenge for some of the, particularly for some of the not-for-profit groups, because they have to go through a procedure with respect to written comments, among other things. And so we are not requiring submission of written comments as a condition to appearing and speaking to us. We'd love to have those. That's terrific if they send them in, and some speakers find that helpful. But others have had challenges
So we-
in getting the writing in. So we'll even accept the writing after they speak. You can do both or one or the other.
So we do accept it, we don't
Yes.
demand is what you're
Correct.
saying?
Correct.
Correct.
Okay, do we encourage them to do it? Is it writing?
We
Do
let them choose.
Do we let them know that they have the option of sending in advance?
Yes.
That's our intent.
Yeah, we say we accept them on through. So you can send them anytime from now till then
I
and
got it.
And Emily, if you could be sure that my comments include an invitation to submit post-hearing comments by the 15th.
sure.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, could I say something?
Please.
So just speaking for myself, and I regret that I won't be able to be at the hearing. I couldn't avoid missing it. So obviously my comments are worth virtually nothing here, but my own view about sort of answering comments or commissioners commenting during the hearing is that, as the chair says, there's sometimes that may be appropriate, sometimes it's not. But I think for me, the guiding principle is that, we're an agency that involves in adversarial relationships with some parts of our constituency. We have people we investigate. We have people who we're in litigation with. We have people who are otherwise sort of engaged in fraught relationships with us. We're also an agency that has significant public messaging responsibilities and challenges, that we're here to build trust in government, and saying the right or wrong thing can have high stakes in that context. And so my impulse is always to want us to speak with a single voice when possible, which effectively means it has to be our staff who are the voice of the organization when there's a risk that you could be perceived as in this context. I think, look, we're here to express our judgment as commissioners, and we do that. But when we're speaking with or to the public, I think it's really important to support not only the staff in an abstract way, but to trust that staff are the voice of the organization when somebody is speaking for colleague as opposed to speaking to each other, which is what we do here. Again, I'm just speaking for myself, but I think that's an important principle because I'd be worried, people, it's a public hearing. Anybody can come with any goals looking to extract anything that may advantage them in any context. That's fair and legitimate, and we still talk to the public because it's an important part of our message. But in that environment, I think it's really important to prioritize speaking with one voice as an agency.
You'll recall last year there was an individual who tried to get very personal with some of us, and responding has no help at all. It's not the purpose of our being there, and the lawyers in the room will understand that statements, admissions against interest, and also other concepts that we don't want to get into. The best bet when we're dealing with those kinds of statements by the public would be to remain silent. That's my view.
Haven't heard from them in a while.
Listen to them, understand what they're saying, but that would be my view. Anything else? All right.
Commissioner James.
May I ask if you're going, 1 second, Commissioner James, when you come to the meeting on the 13th, I would ask that the commissioners, if you could be at the Bar Association not later than 12 o'clock noon, I would appreciate it. Commissioner James.
So I think that we should distinguish between responding to those who speak and asking questions. I mean, there may be a situation where we would like clarification to something that they're discussing. So it may be appropriate for us to ask a question, but certainly I agree that we shouldn't be responding to their any complaints or grievances that they're raised.
We agree. Anybody else? All right, thank you. Let's move on in our agenda. I believe we're up to report from staff.
Yes, thank you.
And at this point, I have to leave, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending. Thank you all, and I leave the balance of the meeting in Vice Chair Ayer's very capable hands, and I'll look forward to seeing you all in a few weeks. Thank you all. Oh, forgive me. One last little piece of business that I neglected in my report. In the new matter that I mentioned, that Vice Chair Ayer worked on, our new commission procedures, which is Resolution 24-02, under paragraph 2, C and D. I'm obligated to report to you the makeup of the committees. I believe I forwarded it all to you by email, but let me just do it publicly. And under D, I'm required to identify the people, the commissioners who I've designated as chairs of those committees. So administration, we have Commissioner James, who is chairing, and Commissioner Edwards and Commissioner Cardozo. For education, we have Commissioner Edwards chairing and Commissioner Caraballo on the committee. If there's anybody else interested, I'd like to add at least one more for education. Please let me know if you're interested. For legislation, we have Commissioner Cardozo as the chair. Commissioners James, Caraballo, and Karas are the members of the committee. I believe that satisfies my obligation. Thank you all for making my first meeting easy. And I look forward to working with you again, as I said, and I'll see you all in a couple of weeks. Thank you. Commissioner Ayers, it's yours.
Thank you, Chair Austin. I have the con, I suppose. Executive Director Berlin. Over to you.
Thank you. Call the commission's attention to the operations update under tab B in the agenda vote. And as before, the first column in the report, and it's true of each page. In the count recent month, September, we have the prior month.
One second. Could, New York, could you mute? Well,
We'll have Jean mute, and then if you raise your hand, we'll unmute you. Jean can mute you.
thank you very much. Hear those whispering snakes again.
Right. Let me start again. So for each report, the first column is the most recent month's data, that's September. We have the prior month, August of this year, then a comparison to a year ago, so September of 2023, followed by current year-to-date figure for that category, and then the comparable period in 2023. First page is investigations and enforcement. As you can see, the commission received 9 tips, complaints, and referrals in September, and you received notice of them in the weekly notifications to commissioners. Total of 23 matters were closed. 18 of those were POLIG matters. 5 were continued from the prior agency. 2 new investigations were opened, and again, you received notice of those in the weekly notifications. As a result, the open investigations now are 152, and that is pending matters, or 152. Open investigations are 53. So the 53 is flat. 2 new matters opened, investigations opened, 2 closed. But it's a substantial, significant decrease in the pending matters, so 152. 14, net reduction of 14. It's quite significant. Equally significant, not reflected in the data because they have occurred since the close of it. There are 4 settlements that our investigations and enforcement group concluded recently. I'm going to turn this over now to Brian Weinberger, Director of Investigations and Enforcement, and his staff to say a few words about those. Those are now public. They have been posted, and so we can talk about those. Brian?
Jean, can you make sure you
No,
unmute
we
New
have
York
to
City?
unmute Brian.
Okay, we're here. We're just unmuting. Thank you. I was just going to comment. We had the 4 matters as announced on Monday. And as you can see from the numbers in the boxes and the 4 matters that we settled, we continue to move matters along as quickly as we can.
All right, thank you. There is public notification of those. It's major accomplishment by staff. I thank them for their hard work in getting those concluded and keeping things moving, and more to come. Next page, page 2. Ethics Group, 90 guidance requests were received in September. Suppose that's a decline from the 125 in August, but still more than twice what we received a year ago. And note in particular, the number of guidance requests this year are continuing to run significantly greater than, more than 50% higher than the comparable period in 2023. With that, I'll turn this over to Director of Ethics, Michael Sand. Michael, anything to add to that?
September was still a pretty healthy month with 90 requests. It is a decrease from the 125 the month before, but that number was pretty extraordinary. And we are running significantly ahead of last year's rate. I believe it's approximately 37% ahead of last year's total as of the end of September.
All right, thank you. Next, lobbying, modest increase in the month in the number of lobbyists. My count, 71, additional 56 clients. So the total number of registered lobbyists now is approaching 9,000, with nearly 4,500 clients registering. There were 146 new registrations in the period, which is kind of typical. September was a bi-monthly reporting period, and nearly 7,000 bi-monthly reports and amendments were received. That's a very significant number to be experienced in a period. So it says something about the increased activity on the lobbying side of our ledger. And again, the overall cumulative increase that we're seeing against last year reflects the fact that we're well into the second year of the biennial registration period. Just another 4 months to go before we start the cycle again. Lobbying inquiries continue to run high. We're now in excess of a comparable period last year, so we're looking at $30,000 mark, and we're only 2/3 of the way through the year, significantly. I will ask Carol Clinton, Director of Lobbying, anything to add to that?
The only thing I'll add are the lobbying inquiries that relates to help desk and legal questions we get. So a lot of that is the help desk or staff getting questions, and then we also get legal questions as well. The only other thing I'll mention to reiterate is, and we've announced this already, is next week, I think it's Wednesday, October 30th, we're having a training. We have about 400 or more attendees already signed up for an online training on how to implement the responsible party regulatory changes that go into effect on December 1st. So that'll be next week.
And can people still sign up for that?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, there's no limit. And also, so it'll be a live training. We will follow it up. We'll be in the chat on the side answering questions as we can, but with that many, we probably won't get to all of them. So usually what we do, and what we intend to do this time, as well as we'll do after the training, we'll post the training. The video will be up there, the slides will be up there, and we usually follow it up, and we certainly intend to do it this time as well. We'll follow it up with an FAQ with the most commonly questions we receive. We'll have a issue response posted as well. And in addition to that, we had already planned on doing like a 1 or 2 page guidance document, kind of how to and what these changes mean and how to effectuate them. So we'll be busy doing all of those things.
And I should add, this is the result of the group, the lobbying division, Carol and Megan, being able to implement some of the changes we were looking for through legislation within not all of them, but within the confines of the existing statutory scheme. So it's a major improvement. And hopefully it will be well received to the lobbying community. And I'm guessing there's going to be another surge in help desk inquiries, notwithstanding the training that you're doing.
I'm sure, yes.
But that will be recorded and available, and folks will be able to
Absolutely.
access it anytime. Right. Good, thank you. Page 4, financial disclosure statements. There's a correction in the first column. We didn't receive another 2,500 filings. We received 460, which is consistent with the progression we've seen in bringing in the non-academic filers who are late, as well as, we haven't talked about it. New employees in the state system who are required to file financial disclosure statements have 30 days to do that. And so throughout the year, notwithstanding the fact that we have the mid-May deadline, the non-academics, the November deadline, mid-November deadline for academic filers, new filings continue throughout the year. And it doesn't mean that it's because these are individuals who were late in those 2 periods. Many of them are individuals who have that 30-day deadline. So we'll continue to see those coming in on time, and of course, some of those not coming in on time, generating the other kind of notification. So the year-to-date total is only slightly different. It's 28,878, which is a pretty remarkable number. We haven't hit the academic deadline yet. That's next month. So we're going to have another surge. And Melinda Funker, Deputy Director of Financial Disclosure Statements, can say a little bit more about that and the notices that her group has sent out to the academic filers. You will see that the number of outstanding filings continues to decline from the high that we had after the May 15th deadline from June. And the number of delinquency notices that have gone out is reflected in the data as well. If there are any questions, but let me ask Melinda. Anything to add to that, Melinda?
Good morning. I just would like to
Good morning.
update on some of the numbers with the failure to files. As you can see, in September, we issued 316. Staff and I have that number down to 44 remaining that we're still doing outreach on. And I also wanted to update on the notices of delinquency. We issued 186 total. We've had 115 resolved, which leaves 71 outstanding as of today. So the numbers are coming down. With the academic filing, we issued our filing notices on October 15th to 4,795 academic filers within SUNY and CUNY. And within the first 5 days, we've had the first 5 days from the notice being issued, around 1,000 people went in and complied with the filing already. So we're right on track with everything.
Thank you. So we're looking at somewhere close to 34,000 filings for the year, perhaps more.
It could be less. Many academics have already received 38 individual exemption requests from SUNY and CUNY academic filers that I'm working my way through now. So it could be less.
Right, thank you. Then I think Commissioner Cardozo, you had a question?
Answer. No questions.
Thank you. And I could add, we are following up on a suggestion from the last meeting. We are looking at additional mechanisms for notifying both agencies as early as possible and filers who miss deadlines of the obligation to file. I mean, I have to say that Melinda's group did an incredible job in getting those filings in. But it's also a huge amount of work. And it would be terrific from our perspective, and I'm sure from theirs, if more filers simply complied when they were supposed to. So we're looking at new strategies for encouraging those to take place. And with that, I will turn to the training report on page 4. As before, we're continuing to separately report the number of individuals who received training from our COLIG training staff, those who received training from their agency personnel, and those who are taking the on-demand CETC. Again, our goal is to have everyone in the state workforce on the executive branch side complete at least one training by the end of the year. We are now at a year-to-date figure, and there may be some duplication. We know there's some individuals, we don't know how many, who've now taken more than one course. So there's a little bit of duplication, but we now have over 121,000 individuals or trainings that have been received since the beginning of this year. When you add that to the 25,000 who were trained in 2022, more than 153,000 trained in 2023, we're at nearly 300,000 trainings completed. And if we can keep the rate of training, and we, we're looking here at just over 10,000, the numbers continue to come in statistically. So we haven't yet received all the data for September. It's going to trickle in over time. Ultimately, when our phase 2 system is fully implemented and we've got everybody in the workforce in it and have all the data, there'll be less sort of manual work to do in getting the data into the system. Right now, there's a lot of that to do, and things do come in late. So that number is going to go up, but even if we stay at that rate, we're going to exceed, by my calculation, 330,000 by the end of the year. I don't want to jinx it, if that's such a thing for ethics training. But it looks like we're going to hit the global number that we're targeting of a workforce at the outer limit of 330,000. We're still getting data in. There's still some principal agencies and authorities whose data is not in the system, where our goal is to get all of them into the electronic database as quickly as possible, as well as to continue the effort to figure out ways to provide more of the on-demand training to agencies that aren't part of the state's SLMS, Learning Management System, administered by OER. Some bodies do have their own learning management system, some don't. And we're looking at a variety of platforms in order to get those out. And again, on the lobbying side, ethics trainings continue to be taken online. So we're well above 80% of the lobbying community, lobbyists and clients who think. Let me ask, I don't know if we have Megan, but Marlena, anything to add to that?
I'm here.
Marlena? Yep.
I
Oh, there you are.
just told Marlena over Teams, I just wanted to draw attention again to our teeny tiny unit. There's 3 training associates and myself. I jump on some of these trainings all the time, but I want to, through September, just our own internal numbers, we trained over 10,000. Beginning of the year, just before the beginning of the year, our own internal goal said, let's try to do at least 10,000 of folks that we do on our own. And based on how it's going, I think we're going to hit probably close to 13 or 14,000, which when you figure there's only 4 of us doing it, I think it's a pretty amazing number. So I like to give our very small staff the kudos when things like this are going on. So.
Yes, a remarkable job all around. And I know your goal is to increase even further the number of trainings the group is conducting. I will add that, we have regraded the training assistant positions and added some additional responsibilities in an effort to fill them as quickly as possible. In the meantime, Bhutan is helping out with the administrative duties, and we're in the process of pursuing a procurement so we can bring in temporary administrative assistants for the group. I think, Mariana, that's going to take 3 weeks or so to get those folks in place, but we're planning to do that. So hopefully that will make a big difference, both in the ability of the group to push trainings out, as well as in the bringing in of the data from the field, if you will. And kudos, of course, to our group, but also to all the ethics officers and trainers out there who have been terrific in getting all those trainings done out in the field. And I neglected to do it before, but I also want to thank them for responding to the survey as well as the lobbying community. Lots and lots of responses and extremely helpful information coming in. So I do need to thank them for that. Any questions? Thank you. Audit and review on page 6. You'll see the numbers are starting to move up in the group. Another 98 targeted financial disclosure statement reviews were completed. I believe that brings us close to, if not at, the full contingent of targeted reviews that the group does conduct of financial disclosure statements. So they can now turn to the random reviews, for which I believe the draw has already been completed. So that will be the next task of that group. The number of random lobbying audits substantially up, 127 completed in September. Year to date is 603. The goal of the unit is to complete between 1,800 and 2,000 audits and reviews annually. They're on target for doing that. The FDS cycle is a little bit different from the lobbying cycle because the draw is based on filings first in mid-May that take place in the non-academic community, and then the academics are filing in November. So they're an annual period. It's not per se a calendar year. A period defined by those 2 filing periods. And they're on, notwithstanding the challenges of upgrading the software, which again, I think is a terrific innovation, but it's been a huge burden for the group. And they are going to be able to use the same software now, not only for audits as in the past, but also for the financial disclosure statement review. So there's going to be more flexibility within the group. Gareth, anything to add to that? Gareth Perrin, our Deputy Director of Compliance Audit and Review. Gareth?
Yes, Judge. Good morning. Good morning, Commissioners. Good morning, everyone. So we're trending up, obviously. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So we're trending up in both lobbying and in FBS. And I don't know if the judge mentioned it there. but we're still recruiting in both units. So we're done an auditor in on the lobby and audit side, and we're done an analyst, and hopefully we'll get one or both pretty soon. But even withstanding that, being short staffed, we're trending up in both units, and so we're about 110 audits year to date on the lobbying side from where we were last year. So which is pretty good. And as the judge mentioned there, we're finishing up with the targeted reviews. I think we're working on the last maybe 20 or so legislators, and then we'll move on to the random reviews. And so we should be at, or hopefully surpass, or at least at where we were in terms of total audits and reviews this year compared to last year. But so yeah, we're trending up, and I want to thank the auditors and the analysts. Like I said, we're down an analyst, we're down an auditor, but still, notwithstanding that, we're turning out. The production is still there, so I want to thank them for that. Thank you.
Gareth, thank you. Yes, Commissioner.
Can you explain the decline in year-to-date data on the number of random FDS reviews completed?
Yes. The decline is, this is an election year, 2024. So the targeted reviews are much higher because they're targeting candidates as well as the incumbent legislators and statewide elected officials. So in an election year, in an even election year, with the entire legislatures turning over, there is that kind of attention first on those. So they're completing the targeted reviews before going on to the random reviews of the financial disclosure statements. That's just the sequence they do. And we have to post those FDSs as well for that group.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So they're turning to that draw. Do I have that right, Gareth?
Yes, you do, Judge. Yeah, it's essentially just the sequence of the reviews that we do first versus the ones that we do second. So eventually, in the current year, the number of random reviews completed will get to something close to where we were last year. So we're finished up the targeted now in the month of October. We'll be done with targeted, and we'll go on to randoms. So eventually we'll get to the number that we're supposed to get to. It's just that we did the number of targeted first, and then we'll move on to random. So we'll get back to par essentially on the random side here soon in the next couple of months.
Yeah. Right. If you look at the last column, 2023, you'll see that targeted population was much smaller because it was an off year. So you'll see for 357 for the targeted reviews in 2023.
Got it.
Because it was not a statewide election year.
Okay, thank you.
So that drives that. Thank you. Any other questions? And last but not least, Public Information Office. I want to say it's been a normal month. No month is normal. But the total now, the additional 13 responses that went out against 11 requests. And I should say the group is fully on time in responding to FOIL requests, which is a remarkable achievement. The year to date now is 164 responses and almost 50,000 pages of documents produced. And I will say this is we're only reporting on the FOIL activity of the group, which is a tip of the large iceberg of work that Emily and her group performs every month. Emily, anything to add to that?
Nope.
No? But it's been a busy month, busy and productive month all around. Any questions on the operations update? Let me say a few words about staffing before we go on. I think everybody saw the chart when we were doing the budget preparation on the number of positions to be filled, and those we're actively recruiting for. As Gareth mentioned, we're recruiting in his group for an auditor and an analyst. I'd like to bring 2 auditors in, frankly. And there's room for that under the expanded staffing plan. It's just a question of finding the right people. It's been doing lots and lots of interviews. We're doing a lot of work in that respect. Hopefully we have a number of viable candidates at this point. So there's potentially 3 positions in that group. We're recruiting for 2 training assistants, we're calling them, but they're upgrading positions in the training group, in the education group. And in addition, we are looking at a data analyst who will be housed in an executive group, but will provide support across the agency and give us a lot of flexibility, both in reporting across the board, all of our activities, as well as augmenting, expanding our data mining capabilities. Not just data mining, but also the ability to look outward and compare outside information with information that we have. There are lots of examples we could go into. So there's 6 positions we were very actively recruiting for. They're all posted. I think they're all posted, still posted now. You can find them on New York Jobs, and there are links on our website to those positions.
Are they based in New York?
They are not necessarily based anywhere in particular. We have some space in New York to accommodate additional hires, although we want to keep those offices for other positions we'll be filling next year. But some of them, primarily could be in Albany, but it's Albany or New York for the most part. Any questions? Thank you.
And I believe the next item is the budget report.
The budget report, and that's under tab C. We are running essentially as we projected. We are expecting to have a small surplus at the end of the year, primarily the effect of recruiting lag. Recruiting is, for everybody in state government, a challenge. We have some additional challenges for a variety of reasons that we're facing. But we're looking at having a surplus, small surplus at the end of the year. For next year, we've distributed the final submission of the budget. We have asked for an increase. The call letter did request a flat budget. We can't do that. As I've said repeatedly, we have an ambitious staffing plan. It's essential to the full operation effectiveness of the commission. And in order to implement that, we need to increase our budget, certainly on the personal services side. And the lion's share of the budget request we've made is on that side. But we also need more money on the non-personal services side. Rent is going up. We do want to get some additional quiet space. It doesn't have to be huge, preferably in the same building, this building we're in here in Albany, for the training group to use, so they can be doing more simultaneous trainings without cross noise creating problems for them. By and large, we were underfunded on the NPS side last year. We didn't get the increase on that side that we had asked for. Fortunately, we were able to move money from personal services surplus over to cover that. But we are asking for an additional $244,000. And the only response just got from DOD, which had been silent, not acknowledging, is they want context.
Yes.
Is that the phrase, Mariana?
Yes.
They want context for the increase. And we have plenty of context to give them. It's really not different from last year. We have the same staffing, except our expenses have gone up in addition to that. Any questions? Thank you. Next, Commissioner per diems. Now, I should say, there is an item on the agenda for the per diems because the salaries of Supreme Court justices went up in April. Commissioners are entitled to an increase in their per diems, which statutorily are based on the salaries of Supreme Court justices.
Excuse me, I'm
So the-
sorry. I'm sorry. We're getting a lot of feedback still, so I'm having a hard time hearing you. I apologize.
So Jean, can you mute New York City again, please? We tried to fiddle with it, but it didn't work.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Can you hear me now? Because I'm speaking up. All right, hopefully that works. Under tab D, you have the chart per diems that were paid on September 25th. So I won't go through the numbers. Doesn't show the total. The total is $34,380.88. The total, and that covers the June and July commission meetings and then prep hours for certain commissioners for the period February through June. And we've broken it down by month, so you can see how those play out. We're asking commissioners for a number of reasons to get their prep time in monthly. That'll make it easier administratively to get these processed in a timely way. The numbers from April 1 forward will be adjusted if the resolution on the per diem adjustment passes, because it will be retroactive to April 1st, when the Supreme Court justices got their increase. So the numbers that are posted are to be taken as advisory, as they will go up somewhat as a result of that increase. Any questions? And we've already talked about the Section 94.1, comprehensive review process. Again, the survey was one principal leg of that. The master class study of the key advisory opinions was another leg. We're anticipating more feedback through the public hearing, which again focuses on the same overlapping subject matter. Whether changes or improvements or modifications are needed to the statutory regime and the effectiveness of the commission under the existing statutes and regulations and advisory opinions.
So I think that means that we're now ready to entertain a motion to move to executive session. Am I right?
That's correct.
All right, so let me just say before we do that, for the benefit of any members of the public who are watching, the commission is going to move to executive session, which means we'll stop live streaming. That typically takes a couple of hours. There will be other business conducted after we return from executive session, but unfortunately, we're not able to predict exactly when that will be. This video will be posted online after the meeting is over, so anyone will be able to watch it, and we won't include, I believe, the 2-hour gap or whatever it turns out to be in that report. So at this point, I would invite a member to make a motion to enter into executive session under Public Officers Law, Section 105 and Executive Law 9411 to address matters concerning pending litigation and investigative and enforcement matters that are confidential under Section 94 of the Executive Law. Commissioner Edwards moves. Is there a second? Commissioner Groenewegen seconds. All in favor?
You're raising your hands.
Okay, we believe New York is raising their hands, and Commissioner Caraballo, I see you. All opposed? I think we got everybody. No abstentions. The motion carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Welcome back to the public session of this October 23rd, 2024 meeting of the Commission on Ethics and Lobbying in Government. I'm Ava Ayers, Vice Chair, and we've just returned from executive session. So I'll turn it over to our Executive Director, Sandy Berland, for an announcement of actions from the executive session.
Thank you, Vice Chair. In executive session, the Commission discussed matters related to litigation and legal advice. The Commission discussed informal guidance pursuant to Executive Law Section 94.7A. The Commission discussed a formal opinion pursuant to Executive Law Section 94.7C. The Commission approved 3 Executive Law Section 94.10F reports. The Commission authorized steps in several investigative matters. The Commission discussed several additional investigative matters, and the Commission's closed 6 matters, one of which was a continued matter, remaining 5 of which were COVID matters. Thank you.
Thanks. And for the benefit of anybody watching, we're picking up with item 9 on the public session agenda. We've completed all the earlier items, I believe. And so this is a proposed advisory opinion. I will invite Sandy to take it up from here.
The proposed advisory opinion is under tab G. Michael, did you want to say anything in addition about this proposed advisory opinion, or are there any questions for Michael?
I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay. Hearing no questions, I would invite a motion to adopt the proposed advisory opinion.
So,
Okay, thanks, Commissioner Cardozo, seconded by Commissioner Groenwagen. Any further discussion? All right, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, all abstentions, the motion carries unanimously. Thanks very much. All right, the next item on the agenda is a proposed resolution on the payment of per diem allowances and expenses to members of the commission.
Thank you. The proposal is, the resolution is under attachment H. Effective April 1st of this year, the salaries of Supreme Court justices were increased somewhat. Under Executive Law Section 94, the per diem compensation to which members of the commission are entitled is linked directly to the salaries paid Supreme Court justices. The resolution therefore proposes amending prior commission resolution 23-01, which provided for the hourly allowance to commissioners for the time they've spent on commission matters to a maximum of 7.5 hours per day, together with expenses. And that resolution had a formula in it that essentially allowed commissioners $127.81 for each hour, again, up to 7.5 hours per day in allowances. The allocation now with an increase in Supreme Court justice salaries to $232,600 annually now translates into an hourly per diem of $140.96. So this resolution would put that new rate into effect, replacing the rate in resolution 2301, and it would apply it retroactively, as I mentioned earlier, to April 1st, when Supreme Court justices' salary increase took place.
Okay. Any discussion? All right, I would invite a motion to adopt the resolution.
So moved.
Commissioner Edwards, so moved. Is there a second?
Seconded.
Commissioner Caraballo seconds the motion. Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, great. Sorry, I can't actually see New York. Is that
Yeah, they always.
all in favor? Okay, thanks. All right, Nobody left to be opposed or to abstain, so the motion carries 7-0. And the resolution is adopted. Thank you. Next item is a proposed emergency adoption of a proposed amendment to section 943.5 of our regs. Sandy or Director?
Yeah, it's under attachment I, and Carol and Megan are here to answer any questions or to explain.
Yeah, just quickly, we received a few comments. We didn't get any during the public comment period, but we did get some recently. And so this is to address that comment and, some questions we received. It's pretty self-explanatory in the memo and the rulemaking and the rule. And so I can take some questions, but if there are none, we would look for a vote to proceed with the notice of emergency adoption and proposed rulemaking. Go forward with this.
Yeah, and let me just add a little bit of texture to it. The inquiry had to do with the fact that some firms are planning to do actual group trainings, ethics training, using our on-demand module for the trainings, and they want to be able to have a system for documenting the attendance and participation of members of their organizations at those. And as they correctly pointed out, the affidavit requirement was going to be a potential complicating factor in that. And in re-examining the statute, Carolyn Megan, and I agree, concluded that we didn't need an affidavit, in fact, to be kept on file, that the certifications that would be presented by those participating in these group sessions would adequately address our concerns and needs.
Okay.
Hence the proposal.
Speaking for myself, I'm a big fan of simplifying the paperwork, so I think this is a great suggestion. Is there any discussion?
And it also conforms to what the New York State courts did recently, so we support there too.
Yeah, and it's consistent with, it's not governed by, but we looked at that question, but it is consistent with what the legislature has done in CPR 2106. I'm doing it off the top of my head.
2106 sounds right to me. but-
Yeah, where anybody's a firm now, you don't have to have an affidavit before a notary.
Okay. So is there a motion to adopt the proposed amendment? Commissioner Groenewegen, is there a second? Commissioner Cardozo? Any further discussion?
And let me just explain, the reason it's coming up on an emergency basis is because we want it to go into effect before the end of the year. So it'll be effective with the new biennial.
Correct. The original rulemaking is effective January 1st. This would, in order to get that done, we would have to do this part also by emergency. So it'll all go into effect January 1st.
Okay. Thus avoiding significant confusion, I think.
Correct.
Right? Yeah, great. All right, motion is on the table. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All abstentions? Commissioner Carballo, I didn't get your vote. I'm sorry.
I vote yes.
You voted in, vote yes? Okay, great, thanks.
Yeah.
Motion carries unanimously.
Sorry.
No, thanks very much. So the only thing remaining on the agenda is the proposed commission meeting schedule for early 2025. And go ahead, Commissioner Cardozo.
I just wanted to suggest, as I suggested to Sandy, well, obviously we will be meeting alternately between New York and Albany. We created sort of a tradition this past 2 years, other than today, that we sort of informally designate one city or the other. And I think that helped us when people could make it, that we would all try to go to either Albany, particularly Albany. And I think that helped bring us all together. We would have informal dinners in Albany in particular. And so I just suggest that maybe informally agree, what those cities are, so that we could sort of aim when our schedules permitted, be at one city or another, and perhaps have dinner the night before.
Yeah, I would find that very helpful myself.
I don't Something has to be part of
And-
it.
and- Let me just add one thing.
Sandy and then
Uh,
Commissioner.
Yeah, and Commissioner Cardozo also made the recommendation that as this informal alternating takes place, and it wouldn't necessarily have to be every meeting, it could be done on a quarterly basis. There would also be opportunities for commissioners to meet with staff in both cities in an informal setting, or perhaps during lunch.
Commissioner.
I concur with all that's being said, with the exception of the fact I don't think it should be so informal. I think we have constituencies across the state, and we should make ourselves available, even though we don't get a lot of public participation. I just think we need to be accessible in both Albany as well as in New York on an alternate basis. And it's not just for, our building our own relationships, which I think is extremely important and has been extremely helpful. I think that it also gives us an opportunity to engage with the Albany office staff and increase and improve upon our relationship with them as well. So I don't think that it should be like an informal or quarterly. I just think it should be every other month. And that if we've got, if we get this, if we get informed early on, we can minimize the inability for everyone to attend as designated.
Is that a motion to continue
Yes.
formally alternating meetings between? New York?
Yes.
Okay. So is there a second for Commissioner Edwards? Commissioner Caraballo? Further, okay, great. Is there a discussion on that motion?
Well, let me just say that to Commissioner Edwards' point, by having commissioners on occasion being in both offices does afford the opportunity to folks for each meeting to have contact if they wish to attend. Members of the public wish to attend, they will know that regardless of which office is proximate to them or they are able to travel to, that there will be one or more members of the commission potentially at that site. So it's kind of a two-way
I agree
thing.
with you. I still have my motion on the floor for that, but I agree with you fully.
Okay, is there any further discussion? All in favor of Commissioner Edwards' motion to continue formally alternating meetings between Albany and New York, please say aye.
All right.
And with nobody left to say nay or abstain, the motion carries unanimously. That reaches the end of the agenda except for the all other business items. So is there
I have
any
a
other
question.
business?
I'm sorry.
Yep.
Will this
Go ahead.
be, are you gonna recirculate this now with the locations in it?
I didn't hear her.
Are we gonna
we-
recirculate it with the
Thank you.
location?
We'll recirculate. Yeah, it's not on for approval today. It's the calendar itself. So you have to, want everybody to check their calendars and make sure.
Oh,
Oh, okay.
These dates
work.
work. These dates work, and then we'll put it on for next meeting.
Okay,
And we'll include
okay.
alternating cells.
Okay. All right, any other business? If not, I can't take credit for the fact that we're closing early, but I'm sure it was my cool, steady leadership and
Because you didn't allow me.
It
calm
was, it
hand.
was.
And my brutally not allowing you to eat lunch that prompted our easy meeting. Thank you, everyone. Thanks especially to staff for great presentations as usual and helpful clarifications. And we'll look forward to seeing you next month.
Yes.
Is that it?
Motion to.
Motion to adjourn.
Need a motion.
I almost messed up. All right.
So
I see Commissioner Karas moving to adjourn. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Commissioner Edwards seconds. All in favor of adjourning, please say aye.
Okay.
There go the hands. It's unanimous, everybody. We're adjourned. Thanks very much.
Great.